let me help you see the world from the perspective of people who are done with church. I was born in 1973, and for my entire life, the dominant narrative of church I have heard is that the church is in decline. And we've heard it a lot today, and we hear it all the time, and I believed it until I came across research by David Scott. David Scott crunched some numbers and learned something. The dominant narrative of church decline is actually a lie. Here's what he did. He broke down the numbers by ethnicity. From 1996 until 2016, Black United Methodist churches added to their membership. Black United Methodist churches grew from about 319,000 to over 438,000. That's an increase of 37%. Native American membership grew by 23%. I'm just getting warmed up. Hispanic and Latino churches grew by 78%. Pacific Islander churches grew by 101%. Asian American churches grew by a whopping 106%. The only United Methodist churches which have declined are white ones by 21%. I need to point out what this means about the narratives we tell ourselves. It means the narrative of church decline is a racist narrative. It's a racist narrative because it treats the white majority as the Methodists who matter. And as I stand here looking at a church that is 94% white in Alabama, as a straight white clergy who is passionate about reaching nuns and duns, I need you to see how those who don't come to church see the church. 81% of white evangelicals voted for Donald Trump. In Alabama, 80% of white evangelicals voted for Roy Moore. Over 60% of white evangelicals have no problem with using torture against prisoners of war. More than half of white evangelicals think immigration and growing racial diversity are bad for American society. Over half of white evangelicals believe that immigration is bad for American society. Only 28% of white evangelicals believe in climate change. Only 28%. We got 12 years to fix climate change. 1 million species are going extinct. Where's your church? This is not a marketing problem. This is a theological problem. We need to ask, what is it about being white that makes it hard to hear and preach the gospel?
Huh?
You heard it through the grapevine. Now, mind you, this was a Caucasian man. These are some of the things that I discuss, some of the realities in my book that some of you have not purchased, and some of you have purchased them, and you put them next to the other decorations on your shelves, the thingamathings, and you've not started reading it. But this is the result of watershed theology, colonization, Romanization, Europeanization, colonization, Westernization, and Americanization of the gospel. And when we look at materials and information that's distributed in the mainstream of our society, it is coming from a predominant perspective, European perspective, and the statistics as well as the methodologies to reach the lost are geared towards not reaching African Americans, Latinos, and Asians and others. It's geared towards the preference and the preferential methodologies of the Europeans. But now, when we try to get data, it's very difficult to extract data for minorities because the majority data really governs the public and private discussions about church growth and development. And, and so the most confusing thing is when it comes to models and images of the church, the majority of the models and the images of the church that you get are what you see on TV. And unfortunately, the dominant positive aspects and parts and segments of the Christian church is not being televised. And many of them are not even being streamed. And so you see the white mega churches on TV, and you hear the emergency decline and the attrition rate of the church, and the image you see is Hillsong and Lakewood and da-da-da. So you see the white church as the savior of the church, but the statistics and the attrition rates are really are out of their communities. Now, I was just reading today about a white pastor at a mega church who committed suicide on the same day that he gave a eulogy for a person who committed suicide, and he spent most of his life dealing with trying to help people through mental health issues and depression and suicide. And when it came to coping and dealing with whatever, he couldn't do it. Now, what's interesting here, because I could talk all day on this subject matter, but what's interesting here is you heard the gentleman talk about the decline is only happening in the European circles. But when you see minorities, when they get ready to live a spiritual life or they think spiritual truth and they want it, then they think we must go to the Europeans because black people and black preachers, they don't know nothing. When the black church is the most stable aspect of Christianity in North America. Now, that's not thinking, that's not opinion, that's factual. Now, when you look then at the reclassification of Christianity in America, we used to be a Christian nation, which means our world was governed by Christian beliefs. Our government positively responded to biblical principles and respected them. And our society as a whole embraced Judeo-Christian values as a value system for success, productivity, and prosperity. Now we are reclassified as a post-Christian nation, and that means now we are a nation that does not live and exist on a strong belief in God and the Bible. So we become very mystical and very subjective. Like there are people that are listening to me now by way of streaming and in the audience that have subjective views about God. And they'll argue and fight, but can't show you one place in the big book what they're talking about to verify it. And then if they do find it, then the majority of the time, it's not in context. So we are now a post-Christian nation, and we live in spiritualism. So everybody has this individual spiritual experience, and they know where God is with them. We make God seem schizophrenic. And so when you look then at the reclassification from Christian to post-Christian, the next classification is neo-pagan. That's the next classification. And that's where we're headed, to a new pagan nation, a nation without God. And everybody else becomes God, da 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 da. You look at Kanye West, he called himself Jesus. He's going from church, I mean, he's teaching church choirs, and because music and entertainment and the arts means more to people than a real relationship with God does. That's the reason you can fill a building up with a good music department and a good choir, but you can't get but a handful of people to come to a good revival, because people are more concerned about their emotions than they are their spirit. And so it's saying, when you look at what's happening, it's very scary. But when you look at the statistics, and I don't have time, but I don't even think I put these statistics in my watershed book, but I have a preponderance of statistics that talk about the increase of African American church attendance and church affiliation, even among the millennials, where when we hear about how the millennials are falling out the church everywhere, what happens is Satan uses that, and it touches black millennials, and then they start saying, yeah, ain't nobody going to church, because they looking at data that ain't really about them. And so then, but see, the real challenge here is there's a transition going on in the society. Christendom is no longer respected in this nation. It's no longer popular. And the Europeans, unfortunately, are accustomed to being popular from the inception of this nation. And so they only know how to be on top and how to be winning, and winning all the time. Winning if it means destroying a whole ethnic group or two. That's fact. That's history. And now it's pressure being a Christian in a post-Christian nation. And the preachers can't handle it. They don't know how to handle rejection. They don't know how to handle not being popular. They don't know how to handle rough times. But I believe, and I'm going to say it, I believe that black folk have come to Christianity for such a time as this. We know how to suffer. We know how not to be popular. We know how to go through. We know how to survive off the scraps. We know what it is to trust in God, even when it seems like God has forsaken us and we're being castrated, we're being hung, we're being listen. We're going through all manner of situations, but yet, in all of that, we didn't grow bitter with God. Our churches are the strongest churches that exist around the world. Around the world. Now, so, it's hard to talk. So, you look now and you don't realize it. So, smart European-led churches, what is their strategy to maintain or get their growth? Bring in black musicians, black singers, black culture, black music, and bring in black pastors, but then route them back out. That's our world. Okay, I'm gonna stop now, because I told you I could talk about this on and on. And you all know I love our white brothers and sisters. Listen, number one, I'm not racist because I ain't got no money. I'm just a Negro with an opinion. Now listen, to be racist, you got to be able to enforce these views. But on the serious note, I don't just have an opinion. I have the truth of God in my mouth. And I believe that this is a time, in times past, there was a one-way bridge exiting folk out of African American led churches over to white churches. I did a dissertation, one of my dissertations, this was for my PhD, looking at the theoretical construct of population ecology, the survival of the fittest. And I researched whether or not African American churches can continue to survive and exist if they don't become more integrated. But in doing that study, and I wrote the book. I have a book, if you're interested in that. It's called Why Can't We All Just Get Along? But what's interesting is the research. We saw blacks going to white ministries, not whites coming to black ministries. And so eventually, if everybody left the black environment, went to the white environment, you wouldn't have black churches. And so that creates also a leadership crisis among blacks in black churches. However, what the research showed is that there was a strong attrition rate and cycles of black people not staying many years before they cycle out. But you couldn't tell the drop of minority attendance because so many blacks were constantly coming over. You never missed those that were leaving. And so the research showed that socially, they never felt accepted. And that was that time when a line of demarcation would be drawn, and you would have to either deny your ethnicity or not be a part of the church. And that's just facts. It's facts. All right, go ahead, you two. Let me let you. I'm so sorry. They were saying the last week was boring. Well, there wasn't nothing boring about this one. Go ahead.
This one was fire, for real. And I loved it. I loved to see my Caucasian brother tell the truth, tell it well. And it is something that goes back to the evangelical church selling its soul to the devil with the elections in politics. And from that point on, you've seen a major decline when they decided to just let theology go out the door for the sake of money and profit and influence in politics. We have seen a constant, they are being seen through. And no one wants to be a part of that. And I'm excited about being an African American. I'm excited about being an African of the diaspora in this time and place, because we are the hope for the church universally. Because wherever we are, we spark revival. You know, I remember when we had Dr. Trevor Grizzle talked about the church in Europe, and he said that the church in Europe would not be a church in Europe if it was not for the African churches. The African churches in every single denomination are sparking revival, even in the Anglican church. So you got evangelicalism, you got Anglican, and wherever the African churches are, they're sparking revival. And so I'm excited. This is the time to be on purpose and not about ourselves, and really be about bringing in more and more people into the kingdom. So it's exciting.
Yeah, it's exciting. And seeing the only thing the devil can do and use, which he's used as a tool throughout chattel slavery, is divide and conquer. The Willie Lynch syndrome. Young versus old, male versus female, bright versus dark, thick nose versus smaller nose, thin hair, straight hair versus kinky hair, field Negro, house Negro, and divide and conquer. That's what the enemy does. And being a historian and doing what I do, and I've been doing this 35 years, and of course, you know my academic pedigree, and our ministry went through something that I thought was impossible because I tried to set it up knowing those kinds of strategies of divide and conquer. But the enemy tried to destroy this very powerful pulpit through divide and conquer in order to stop the gospel of the kingdom from going forth. But I'm so thankful that my God is mighty and he's strong. And this is where the power is. The power is in the gospel, not in the gossip.
You're right, Apostle. One of the things that the enemy, he really specializes in is really trying to control the narrative, the voice, what's being told out there, the story. And because people believe anything, we see that in politics. And one of the things I know and I love, Dr. Carson, is that we have a prophetic pulpit. And people have to hear the voice of God through the man of God and hear the prophetic voice that God is speaking through at this day and in this hour. You spoke that this was an African reformation. You prophesied it. You say this is the time for the African to rise up because this is our moment. And now it's just wonderful to hear data substantiated what the prophetic voice of the Lord has already spoken. And so we have to heed the voice, the prophetic voice of God, and understand what times and seasons we're in. And when you understand who you are and the season that God has called you to be a part of, then you won't take yourself for granted, you won't take this ministry for granted, and you won't take this man of God for granted.
I'm so incredibly moved by what God is doing. Fell in love with a little book, circumstantially and situationally. I feel like God almost, and I don't mean this literally, magically put it in my hand. It was in my library for years, and I didn't even know I had it. Book called Loyalty, Disloyalty. Didn't know I had it. I just was looking for a book on marriage because I was about to do some marriage stuff. And the book was, and I try to keep my books in order. And I'm like, what is this? Is this about being unloyal to your spouse, disloyal? And then I picked it and I just looked, and it was a guy, Dag Heward Mills. And I said, okay, I never heard of it. And I started reading through the book. I said, man, this is a good little book. And I said, this is a good ministry tool here to have people, because loyalty is the same word as faithful. You have to be found faithful. And I was like, well, okay. Then I did a little research on the guy, and I asked Dr. Clark, because he used to pastor. I found he was in Ghana, from Ghana. And Dr. Clark pastored in Ghana, and he told me in his international lectures, because he's an associate professor at Fuller, and he told me that he lectures about this guy as a model of successful Pentecostal, African Pentecostal ministry. And so he told me a little bit about him, told me that he owns his own hospital. He was a med student. He was in medical school. God called him to pastor. He got out of med school. And then he said he started a university, his big university there. And he said he's planted over 2,000 churches. And he uses this theme, loyalty, disloyalty. And I was reading, I was like, wow, he's all that. And I asked Dr. Clark, I said, do you think you can, because we were talking about going to Ghana. I didn't know he was in Ghana. And we were talking about going to Ghana. So you think we can set up somewhere I can meet him? He said, well, I don't know him personally. He said, but I can call around and see what's going on and see what we can do, if he's going to be there, so forth. I said, well, please do that. And then just a couple of months ago, I got a call, and I was invited to be one of two speakers from the U.S. on an international pastor conference called the Good General Conference. And it was hosted by Dag Heward Mills. And so next Thursday, I'll be speaking at his conference here, which is held at Bishop Beatty's church, Harvest Time. So Beatty's a speaker, I'm a speaker. Then his brother-in-law, who's a bishop is speaking, and Dag Hewitt Mills is speaking. And see, this is a prophetic season. I wasn't thinking nothing about this, and I'm a historian, but I wasn't thinking nothing about 1619. I just wasn't thinking about it, and as we were planning to go and doing all of the mechanics to get ready to go, then it was articulated to me, and the first time it came to my attention was I was at my best friend's 60th birthday, and I was telling Dr. Claudette Copeland that I was getting ready to go to Ghana, and she was saying, "Oh, y'all going back home." So the deal is, this is the back home deal. So everybody is traveling. And I don't mean everybody, but groves of people are traveling to Ghana because this is the celebration of the 400 years of slavery since they left the port. And so we're going back to Africa in this day and time. Man, listen, I don't know what God's going to do. I'm just not that happy. Listen, so, because just to know what God's going to do. Well, go ahead, something on your mind.
What's so amazing about Dag Hewitt Mills is that he is an amazing church planter. He has thousands of churches around the world. And to have a man of African descent to do that around the world, you know, we lift up these mega churches, but that's not the model of Jesus. The model of Jesus is in every city, in every region, in every country. That's the biblical model, and so I'm excited about the connection. I'm excited because the move of the expansion of the kingdom is coming through the African bloodline. I'm excited. This is the age of Ethiopia where she's stretching out her hand towards God. And I hope and pray that people of every ethnicity and every race will be able to hear the voice of the Lord. He who has an ear, let him hear what thus saith the Lord. This is the time and season to hear.
This is why we went through 400 years of slavery and oppression for such a time as this. We did not go through slavery for no reason. We went through because God wanted to put us on this continent at this time in order to preserve his voice around the world and take his kingdom message. So I'm excited, but I'm excited.